Merry Christmas. I've been wanting to do this video for a while now. It's currently probably already Christmas when you're watching this video, or it passed. Regardless, I have here the Bible. I've proudly just finished the book of Genesis. And I want to get into my thoughts on the Genesis and what I took away from it. And I feel like this should be a consistent thing or a series. Of course, until the time I finish the entire Bible. But I want to break it into books. Each book would be a separate video, just specifically only talking about that. So the next episode for this will be Exodus. And I will put it all in a playlist. So if you want to go in order, hear me talk about the things that currently or at the time of finishing reading the book, what I took away from it, my thoughts, my 2 cents, and kind of what I would like to tell you all. So in the very beginning, it actually says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty. The darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. In the very beginning, yes, of course, the creation of everything was becoming. But I would like to specifically mention something that kind of just resonated with me. So if you continue on, you'll start to realize that God is saying things and He's labeling it good. For example, He says, "Let there be light," and then there was light. And then He said, and God saw that the light was good, right? And then He said, separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. And evening passed and morning came, marking the first day. And He continues talking about the space between the waters. And then just to move very forward, it says, God called the dry ground land and the water seas. And God saw that it was to be good, or that it is good. This is very interesting that He's not saying perfect. It's very interesting that He's not saying it's amazing or it's perfected. If God is creating something, He immediately told you that what He's creating isn't perfect. He is telling you that it's good. The baseline will be good. And so He talks about, for example, He talks about the trees. He saw it to be good. He talked about the ground, like I just said. He saw it to be good. He talked about the waters. He talked about the fishes, or whatever the scenario would be. If He talked about some certain thing, He said it was good. So that gives us a perspective that God is creating something good. So when He creates something in heaven, it is perfection, right? So just to give you that idea of like, what is heaven like? Because that's probably a question that you've always answered or asked. And that answer would be, it's perfection. It's incomprehensible for us to understand what perfection is. And even though we now know that it's a day and night difference, God creating something in heaven is perfection, we would still call our loved ones or our mothers or wives, whatever the scenario is, or our daughters, that they are perfect, right? Again, you could say the same thing for your fathers or brothers, but I'm just giving you an example of what I would normally suggest what perfection would be. And I'd love to say that's a motherly figure, or my sister, or a daughter of mine, right? And that I would label that as perfection. But the idea is that we have no cognitive ability to understand what perfection actually is. And it kind of gives like that's one of the first things that kind of just stuck with me. It's just like, wow, like heaven is unobtainable. Again, I haven't read Exodus or anything else. I haven't read anything at all. I just stopped at Genesis and I waited. I've been wanting to read Exodus for a while now. But I haven't made this video, so that's why I'm here. But that's exactly what it is. It's just like that shocking, like, wow, I never knew. I always wanted to know like how the golden gates are, and what's past it, and how will everything look, and how would the kingdom of heaven look like. And it's exactly that. It's just unprocessable in our human world. And I would like to continue by saying that when God created man, He didn't say, and He saw it to be good, and then He created Eve. He saw that man, Adam, was there. And after He created him, He said, there's something missing, right? And He created Eve from his rib. And then He saw it to be good. And I just thought that was very interesting. Maybe I'm reading too depth into it, or maybe if you yourself thought the same thing, please let me know. But I just genuinely think that God had a very unique way of just saying he made Adam. He didn't say it was good yet. It was only good when Eve was around. And I just thought that was very interesting. So, I don't know, keep that in your mind. Maybe there's a story there that I am missing. But if you think that it's even relevant to you talk about it, please mention anything you want in the comment section. But that's one of the first things that I've noticed and kind of like harped on it in my mind. And it says in the very beginning that when they were both in the Garden of Eden, they love to say that, oh, they immediately portrayed a woman being a bad person. That is not true. In the very beginning, it says that Eve was deceived. Eve was tricked. It wasn't Eve doing the wrongdoing. She didn't know, and then she purposely just took it. She got deceived. The serpent that spoke to her was in the intention of trying to deceive. Now, it doesn't say that the serpent tried deceiving Adam and never worked, and then started doing it with Eve, didn't work, and then one time he finally got back to Eve and finally it fell for it. No, like, there was no trial basis. It just happened. It just was written down, the information, the amount of information that we're supposed to just walk away from, and that is that Eve was tricked. So, just letting you know, because a lot of people like to say that, and that's also one of the things that just kind of stuck with me. But yeah, for those who find that the story of Cain, or the story of Cain and Abel, right? I hope that I'm pronouncing Abel right. I can't read, so no. But seriously, like, I feel like there's a story in that, and if you have like a meaningful takeaway from that small passage, or I'm assuming it's pretty big because it actually talks about a lot about it, but if you want to talk about that, please put it in the comment section. I would really appreciate you guys all conversing and talking about what you think or what your thoughts on, specifically, not just in Genesis, but specifically on Cain's story. I find it memorable, but not one of the main things that I would like talk about for a long time, other than this. So everyone knows that people make mistakes. This is probably one of the big ones that you might find, or might resonate with you in your heart. But when you do something or you say something, sometimes you want to take it back, right? And that scenario actually happens quite often when you have anger issues or when you're not able to control yourself. That's just part of it. One thing that I would like for everyone to understand is that God, even Him, the creator of everything, He apologizes. Specifically in the Noah's flood, He addresses that He's apologizing specifically to everyone that He created us. This is actually pretty sad, because you know how we are all knowing and we are all who we are, and we unfortunately seek our own vengeance upon other people. We unfortunately find each other holding each other accountability except for ourselves, and we condemn other people and tell them that they're not doing what they're not supposed to be doing. Or we twist the Christianity idea and just tell our loved ones or our best friends, telling them that they're not doing a Christian thing, even though they themselves privately don't do the same thing. They don't take their own advice. And so this piled on specifically to God, and God sees everything, so He sees this and He's hurt by it. And His way of almost restarting everything, or maybe just wiping everything out, just cleaning the slate and just saying, forgive me, my bad, kind of scenario, is when God specifically says that He's sorry. He's sorry that we even existed. And that's kind of scary to think about. Someone that's so powerful taking it back. And it's just like we're so small in comparison. Yes, we hurt each other and we do horrible things to each other, but even God said, I'm sorry. And then he changed His mind. And that is the one thing that a lot of people don't understand. When you cast out God, or when you're outside, or you put your hands together, or you pray, or even if you speak out loud into the cosmos and the stars, and you just yell at God, or you condemn God, or you blame him for being bad or evil, and saying the certain situation of mine, for example, if I lost someone and I yell at God for it, yes, he hears you and he hears what you're saying. He also understands that you don't know the full story, but he doesn't just look at you and say, wow, I messed up on this person, send them away, really. Instead, he works on you. He understands that you're yelling and you're complaining because, and he specifically later down on the line of the book of the Bible, you would acknowledge that we live in a world of suffering. Now that's just jumping, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sense of it with my understanding, but I just find it very interesting that you can have a hardened heart. God can create your heart to be hardened, and that means that he has looked at you and he said he has nothing to do with you anymore. If you want to live a life without God, you will live eternity without him. I think his name is Chad, to give credit. I'm not exactly sure his actual name, his full name, but my point is that you can have a hardened heart. You can earn one, and God can just give it to you. But the beautiful thing about it is that since he changed his mind when he told Noah how to build an ark and have all his animals go into that ark, during the flood it wipes out everybody else but keeps the righteous ones. And I thought that was very interesting because I was told that someone in the Bible has gotten 3 hardened hearts, and he has forgiven, or not necessarily forgiven, but just changed his mind. God changed his mind, took his hardened heart away, and tried again to pursue him. And I just think that's a very beautiful thing. And if you currently have a scenario or a moment where you just casted God out, you need to understand that God can change his mind if he has given you a hardened heart. I wouldn't know if you know, because I don't think I've ever had my heart hardened, but I feel like it's very lonely. So if that's the case, I would recommend you try and convince God to change his mind, because I mean, being with God and feeling his grace and his love is everlasting, and I recommend it. Specific notion that I would like to reference is the call of Abram, also known as Abraham. I feel like that one is just so remarkable and so like eye-opening for me. I was reading this and it dawned on me that everything relies on Abraham. It was a shocker because I didn't know that he himself was the root. I thought it was just like, I don't know, I just never thought about it. And it kind of just surprised me, but he's the root of all of our existence. He's the root of us expanding and building off and having our own kings and queens and countries later down the line, having our own nations. And I find that very surprising because it all roots on him. And I really love the part where God speaks to him specifically, saying that I will give you this land for your descendants. And he also speaks to him and says that if you look upon the stars, you will see all these, like, you see your ancestors that are going to, or you see all your children, right? And all your future generations of you, really. And I think that's so remarkable because one of the valuable things in the past was having children, and I didn't know that. People would love to seek for land and seek for their own assets. I just think it's very interesting. Another very interesting thing about Abraham was the new name change. Whenever you have a dog or a cat or a bird of any kind, of any pet of any kind, it is your responsibility. You're supposed to take care of this bird, you're supposed to take care of this cat. The point is, renaming something gives you ownership of that animal or that person. So when God does it to Abram and gives him Abraham, like the new name, he goes and continuously lives his life as Abraham. He was told specifically his name was Abraham, and I feel like it's a very kind gesture of God to specifically tell him his new name, because I don't know, for those who don't know, but when we go to heaven, we're going to have new names. We're going to be renamed, and it specifically says that we're going to be held a tablet. We're going to have a new name carved on it, and only us would know what it is, and we'll say it. I feel like it's God saying, I got your back. And I feel like a lot of people would deceive this moment and say, well, that's kind of like belittling or taking control, or I feel like people would see and perceive it as ownership by force. And I feel like when you have a dog or a cat, they are loyal to you and they love you, and at certain times they don't even care if you name them a certain animal or a figment story of like Sasquatch, and you call your dog Sasquatch or whatever because he's hairy. I don't think he finds it offensive. If anything, he knows that you're calling him those sound waves is all he knows, and he's loyal to you and he loves you, and he's going to be by your side. If you are rich and famous, he'll be next to you, and if you're poor or in the middle of under the overpass, he'll lay beside you regardless. He will be your dog, and he will be your cat, he will be your partner. And I feel like it's the same way with God. See, when you see your dog and you see your cat, you don't treat them negatively. You give them food, you play with them, you spend time with them. You sometimes even just vent. When you're having a hard time, you talk to them. God is the same way, and when he looks upon you, he wants to be your best friend. But yeah, I hope that kind of resonates with you. If you kind of understood what I'm trying to say, please let me know in the comments. Again, I want everyone to comment as much information as they want on the comment section, because I want to hear your thoughts. And maybe if it's a lot of comments, I would love to make a whole thread about it, or a whole new video. Another thing I want to, before I go past Abraham, I specifically also want to talk about how his wife specifically is trying to pull him away from this idea of God speaking to him. And I feel like just recently I had the kind of same scenario where I was talking to someone, and I said that God spoke to me, and they immediately were like, and it wasn't in the idea of like, I don't believe you. It was more of the idea of like, well, you gotta make sure it's actually God, right? And they're looking out for me. But in Abraham's situation, his wife probably was just saying like, oh, we have nothing. God specifically told you to come here in the middle of nowhere, because for those who don't know, God gave him a land to live and settle for his new kingdom. His wife probably was just like, this is bare, this is nothing. The next closest thing to food is a nation away, or a very long distance of travel, and just to bring back food. And it was a lot of like, not necessarily doubt, but just like more concern about the right now situation. And Abraham was very specific in saying, just give me a second, like, God told me to wait here. If he says to wait here for 6 months, I'll do it. And I find that very interesting. And during that time, they're trying for children. They're trying to bear children, and it's not working. His wife starts to say, well, if God said, and this is kind of crazy, but she says that you're going to have many nations, why can't we bear children? Why am I yet disappointed again? I'd love to give you a recommendation for a movie. It's called, I believe it's called The Northern Star. I'm not exactly sure. I'll put a photo of it right here. It's by Angel Studios. Ironically, they kind of brought it out, or they released it this year, which is funny because I just got into Genesis. So I feel like that was perfect timing, but I really like that story because it really gives perspective and the type of person he would actually be in person. And it kind of just gives him like the ability of just being like patient, you know, and it really gives like the demonstration of patience and knowing that it's God's will, not his will. Of course he wants a nation, of course he wants riches, of course he wants children, of course he wants everything. But he's kind of like I would like to bring up another analogy where it's kind of like the coach for a basketball team or any sport. but specifically for this analogy, we're going to say basketball. And God is the coach, and he's watching the game, and right beside him are the benches, and you're on the bench. He sees you. He sees that you're eager to go. Of course you want to play. Of course you want to get minutes in. Of course you want to try to do your best, but you're not in yet, and you're sitting on the bench, and you're just kind of like impatiently. And I feel like if God told you, oh, you want to go? Alright, I guess you're going to go. I feel like you're not going to be in the best hands ever. See, the coach knows the play before the game starts. He knows what's happening. He knows that we're losing, or he knows that we're winning. Why send out you if it's not your time? And he's specifically visually watching this happen. And when he finds that his best teammate or his best player or their best player gets injured, he knows to sub you in. And I feel like that's just like, it's kind of like he's fixing the pattern, the puzzle, right? And he doesn't need that piece yet. He definitely needs you, but he needs you to be patient. And I believe God was trying to tell Abraham, even though he had this consistent push down by his wife. And again, it could be happening in your life right now, where someone's telling you, you gotta be in the game. Why aren't you doing this many scores and this many points and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of that idea. It's just like that pressure is getting to you. And God just says, give me a second. Let me fix everything out. And as soon as you're in, you're going to be a star player, because I'm setting you up to be a star player. So I just feel like that's very interesting, and I hope that makes sense to you. So another big one about Abraham is that he actually ends up bearing his children. If you want to read specifics and read between the lines, I recommend you just reading Genesis. But I'm giving you my highlights, and it's completely my perspective and what I think that it should be worth mentioning. Again, some people might want to hear about Cain. Some people want to actually hear about the process of trying to conceive a child for Abraham. But I'm going to skip past that and get into what I feel like I should talk about. So finally, God gives him the grant and gives him a child. During this time, he is overwhelmed by happiness because Abraham gets to have a child. On the other hand, it is not so great because it's not with his wife, it's with someone else. Once again, his wife is condemning him, or just completely giving him pain and another reason to get upset, and really testing his patience. Now, he's not telling him, probably in ways of just saying like, why is it not me? Am I not worthy enough? Or is that the situation that it's me? And she starts really thinking on her own and just like upsetting herself. And Abraham is trying to understand this whole situation and give her the best he can do. But I feel like that's when I would really want to direct you to the to the movie. In case you don't like reading, I recommend you watching this part. It really talks about Abraham's story and his whole depiction of his mind. But they play it out so well where she's just upset at him, and they add like extra dialogue to kind of like continue the whole story. But I just find it really interesting that his wife would ridicule him, saying it's his fault that he had a sexual relationship with someone else, even though that she granted that relationship. And then she turns on herself and says, am I not worthy enough? Is it me? And I just find that very interesting. I feel like a lot of people will be in that situation where you're trying to make sense of certain things and certain times, and you must understand that you are forcing an outcome, and that outcome is not going to be able to understand if you don't have God with you. Because this whole time Abraham has been speaking to God, or God has been speaking to Abraham, and it's very one-sided. Even though Abraham is specifically telling his wife everything that God is telling him, she still just chooses to find her own understanding. And I feel like that's probably the biggest problem. Not in her, and not in him, and not in God, but in the whole situation. So after they have a child, God specifically tells Abraham that he needs to sacrifice his son. Now this is probably the biggest thing ever, and this is the big like shift change, because this whole time Abraham has been begging. His wife has been begging for children. And he looks upon God and says, "You promised me a nation, and now I'm going to kill off my child." And it's kind of like the biggest like question mark, right? But like I said about the puzzle thing, God has all the puzzle pieces. He's aware of every one of them. Even though you may not see the next puzzle beside you or across the entire table, He's aware of what's going to happen. And when he's setting up this puzzle, He is not just doing it to test Abraham. It is much more larger than that. In the Bible, in Genesis, it specifically mentions that God was looking for the trust of Abraham by seeing if he would actually go through with what God said. But this is much more bigger than that. He's testing if laying down his own son, or a man laying down his own son, is possible. Yes, I understand that he knows that it's everything. He knows everything. He knows everything's possible, but he's just writing it down because he's aware that it's going to be written down. But he's letting you know preemptively that there is going to be a sacrifice. And spoiler alert, Genesis. This is all in Genesis, by the way. But spoiler alert, in the New Testament, you're going to know about a guy named Jesus, and he's going to sacrifice himself and save all of us, right? I just find it so crazy, but he's just he's doing a layup, kind of going back to that basketball thing. He's doing a layup for this huge slam dunk, right? I'm going into basketball. I'm gonna get away from it. I'm not even a friggin' sports player. And during this whole time when his son, Abraham and his son are going up this mountain, his son keeps asking, wait, we have everything that we're going to do to sacrifice, but why don't we have the lamb? It's very interesting that his son says lamb, or specifically the sacrifice, the animal for sacrificing, and Abraham responds with, God will provide. And you must understand the amount of pain that he's feeling throughout this entire time. And then when they finally get on top of the mountain and they're about to give the sacrifice, he tells his son, please lay down. And he informs his son, God told me to sacrifice you. And I feel like the most craziest scenario is, throughout the entire time, his wife would consistently puncture the idea of like, is he really talking to you? Because this isn't happening. Or does he really want us to come here? Because there's nothing here. Like she's really like pushing it. And the craziest thing about it all, more than just sacrificing, is that his son said okay. I feel like that was a big takeaway from it, because if my mom told me that I have to pass away because God told her, I don't know about you. I myself would be asking God, is this really what you want to do? Because that is scary, I just find it very interesting that his son said okay, laid himself upon the altar. And another thing that I have to mention, because I'm leaving you on a cliffhanger, but as soon as Abraham pulls back the knife to stab his own son, angels came and prevented him. Or God came and specifically told him, stop. Whichever the choice you want to make, but the point is that it was a test, right? But I feel like it's just a puzzle in placement for Jesus in the future. So that's just that takeaway. I'm going to be skipping Jacob's story. It did have a big notice, or a big memorable thing, but I want to get into Joseph's story. For those who don't know, Joseph currently living with his family. I believe, I'm not exactly sure, but it's his dad, and then his 3 brothers, and he's the 4th. I believe that's the case, or if not, he has 4 brothers and he's the 5th. Regardless, he's the youngest one. And during this moment, he ends up having dreams, and this is really big. He envisions, or he dreams, a bunch of people in front of him all bowing down to him. And then he wakes up And he's confused. He's like, I don't understand why that was the thing. He tells his brothers, and his brothers are like, oh, and they ridicule him, and they make fun of him. They say, what does that mean, that we're gonna have to bow down to you? They brush it off, right? And that's what it was. And then later down the line, the next day, he has another dream, but this time it's much more greater. It was nations bowing down to him. So then he told his father, even though his brothers are like, oh, this is dreamer boy over here, he tells his father, and his father looks upon him and says, he wasn't immediately like calmed down, but he also said, nations? So does that mean I need to bow down to you too? And he made the same remark. I'm not exactly sure if his father meant it in a very like condemning way, or his ridiculing way, as his brothers did, because it's not written like that. But maybe that's something you should like, I don't know, comment about it. But moving on. So then Joseph ends up going about his day, and he has another dream, and his brothers are now upset about it. They're getting annoyed. His dad tells his other brothers to go and get food. I believe it was like fishing, something like that. Regardless, it was away from the house, and it was a trek away. So they walked away, and his Joseph ends up looking upon his dad and says, "Can I go with him? Do you mind if I catch on?" And his dad says, "They're too far away, but fine. You just go quickly and you catch up to them." One thing that I find it very interesting is that when Joseph is going out of his way to find his brothers, it specifically mentions that he ends up talking to some random man. And the random man just says, "Oh, I think they went that way." Kind of like asking for directions. I don't know about you, but if I have a story to tell, or if I have a memorable moment in my life, I don't specifically harp on the details. And I feel like that's very important. Maybe it was an angel specifically guiding Joseph in that direction. Or maybe it was just a man, and God said, don't go to work, or don't work on your farm, don't talk to your wife, don't do anything, just stay outside. Because I feel like he was placed there specifically. I don't know why. I feel like that resonates with me, where it's just kind of like this passing moment where I'm trying to get somewhere. Do you have directions? And you telling me, yes, it's this way. And for me to mention it, for me to even bring it up, I could just say, and Joseph could have just literally said, he found his brothers. I'm just gonna harp on that for a little bit, but that was it. So now moving on. So now Joseph catches up with his brothers. Before his brothers finally get to speak to him, they all converse within each other, and with complete ill intention to kill his brother. They all talk to each other, and they're like, we can't do that because moral reasons. So one of them says, how about we just put him in this like chain, or this like case, and just leave him in the woods, and then we'll just grab clothes of his, we will remove all his clothes, we'll drench it in some animal blood, and then we'll show it to our dad and say, hey, wolf has got him, or some animal got him. And we blame the shift on that. So they did exactly that. They ripped upon his clothes, they threw him on the cage, and they left him there. It also mentions that one of the brothers were going to come back and retrieve him. I guess it wasn't necessarily their way back, but they spoke to each other saying, hey, as we're walking back home, I should just come back and get him. I'm not exactly sure why they'll do something like that, but I guess they have a very twisted mind, and they're kind of just taking it back. So during that moment, some random people came and looked on him, and they said, oh, let's just add him to our collection of slaves. And they made Joseph a slave. And one of his brothers even mentions that one of his brothers, the next, I don't know, couple hours, maybe the day, or I'm not specifically sure where it says that, but the point is, he came back to see that the cage was empty or gone, right? And he was like, uh-oh. So he went back and told his brothers, I'm assuming, not exactly sure, but the story continues with Joseph, and Joseph goes upon this huge journey as a slave. And because Joseph was good to God, God was good to him, and it specifically mentions that. And I feel like that's something that you should think about. Joseph, and then it also mentions that he would do things well, or he would do things good. And they told him to do such things. They told him to tend the farm, and it was the best batch of food that came in. And whatever the scenario was, whatever that he got told to do, he would bring back tenfold of the best, right? And his master noticed it, and he said, you know what, you're my right hand. I'm going to need your help. I'm going to ask for you. You're going to be that guy right next to me. And I feel like being upgraded from a slave to a right hand is probably the best thing you could ever do. It's a huge jump and a huge leap. Fast forward Joseph's story. He ends up going onto a journey that is a lot different than all the other stories that I've ever seen. I feel like Joseph kind of resonated with me so specifically because even though his situation was difficult, he made the most out of it. And so when the master's wife tried to seduce Joseph, Joseph said, no, this is a sin. This is against the law. Countless times Joseph would counter this offer or this forceful suggestion. And one time his wife, the master's wife, forced herself upon him. And as he ran away or tried to move away, evade the situation, Joseph's clothes ripped off. And as she stays with the clothes and Joseph runs away bare-chested or completely naked, she screams out that she was attacked. And she plays the innocent card. This is when all the brothers or all the siblings of the master realizes this, and they run and capture him. He's immediately upset and infused with rage, and he says, how can I trust you? You know, I gave you everything. How can I trust you ever again? So he sends him off to jail. And when he sends him off to jail, he became the best prisoner again. He needs to be the best of everything that he does. So the guard ended up really liking him. So then he told the guard, you know what, you're in charge of your cell. Anybody that comes in, they need to do this, they need to do that, they need to brush their teeth, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the scenario is, whatever the rules checks are, they were checked. Because he was, you know, Joseph was perfect. I mean, in reality, he did only perfect things or good things. And so when that passed on, the Pharaoh sends off two of his right hand and left hand, I'm assuming, and sends them down. Joseph speaks to them, says, hey, well, this is what you got to do. You're in prison, you're in the cell, I need you to do these things, and gives them the checklist that they need to check, right? So after they did what Joseph said, being a good prisoner, teaching them how to be a good prisoner from another prisoner is interesting. But the next night comes over, and in the morning they both say that they had dreams. Joseph ended up becoming a really well reader of dreams. He tells one of them, says, your dream is going to be a staff impaled in your whole entire body, and you will pass away in this moment. And then he looks upon the other person and says, your dream is going to be, you're going to be forgiven, and you're going to stay by the side of the Pharaoh. He specifically says, remember me when you tell the Pharaoh, Joseph's asking to get out of this prison. The Pharaoh's servants, he calls him back and he removes him from jail. Out of nowhere, he grabs a staff and stabs the one that Joseph told. And then tells the other one, you will stay as my right hand, or I forgive you, or whatever the scenario is, making his story true. The crazy thing is that the servant, or the right hand, completely didn't remember about Joseph's story, or his testimony, his words saying, remember me. It was until later that the Pharaoh himself has a vision, and he has a vision of, I believe of like 4 birds specifically. The dream doesn't really specifically matter, but the meaning behind it does. And he was asking, I want to know what my dream is. And that's when his right hand man said, I know a guy, I know the guy. I don't know the time period of how long this was. I believe it says it, I'm not exactly sure. But Joseph has been in prison for a very long time since then. Joseph says that there's going to be a famine. And it is very important that you have someone wise, someone really intelligent, someone beside you to help you and aid you during this moment, because there's going to be a famine. For those who don't know what a famine is when the crops cease to grow. Everything ceases to break down and just completely go into waste. And there would not be a time to create food. And so the Pharaoh looks at Joseph and says, "All right, you're my right hand." So after he replaces his left hand, it's a big honor for Joseph to even have this, and it makes his dream, the first dream, true when people would bow down to him. And he was gifted this huge amount of power, and people would bow down to him, people would praise him, and he would have this emblem and this like huge pharaoh-like jewelry to signify that he is king. Then he tells, if you want to read about Joseph, I recommend it. It talks about how he evaded the famine and helped everyone else. But the point is, to fast forward, his brothers come to seek for food because during the famine they don't have. Eventually he told them, "I am Joseph." Then he tells his Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh finds out, and he's welcoming, and he tells his family, bring him over, and his brothers feel so betrayed and feel so sad and feel so regretful. But the beautiful part about it all is that God gave Joseph a story or a moment of path, and he did not pull away from God. He followed the directions and followed the story that God gave him, and throughout his entire time he was being truthful and honest. And I feel like that's really interesting, because I feel like a lot of people would opt out. I feel a lot of people would take matters to their own hands as soon as they get power, or they just banish their brothers and send them to prison forever, and for them to rot there, or whatever the scenario is. I feel like it's very unfortunate that people would see that situation and they'll see Joseph's story and they'll take away that riches will come. If I follow God's path, riches are going to come. I won't be the emperor, I won't be the pharaoh, I'll be this idea of powerful. And that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is that Joseph, even though he was gifted that power, he didn't condemn his brothers. Even though they have, in reality, he has every right to do that. But instead he tells them, "I forgive you." He gives his brothers and his father a home that's suitable. Moving off of Joseph's, I knew Joseph's going to be a long one. I believe that's the end of it. Next episode would be about Exodus. I am reading a NLT translation, or NLT version of the Bible. I like it. I feel like it's easier for me to read this. I've had another version and I just can't for the life of me make sense of it. But anyway, if you want to read along with me, please check out Genesis. Finish it up. And by the time I make this next episode for Exodus, I want you all to be caught up or even finish Genesis or Exodus 2. If you've read it already, have those memories in store. So whenever I make a video and I recite those stories, that I feel like it's very meaningful. Even the little minute details that I have maybe might open up a branch or an idea for you, but I'm really happy I finished this video. Not because it was a long one, but I've been wanting to read Exodus. The point of the Bible, and the point of every movie, and the point of every story that I haven't even read yet, is to get you closer and prepared for God. And it's not just by getting closer. Of course, it's a huge, important thing, but to get you prepared for God is something very different. But anyway, thank you guys. That's my first book of the Bible. I'm getting to Exodus next. God bless you. If this video helped you out in any way, please give it a like and subscribe. Check out my YouTube channel. If you're watching on Reels or anything else, check out my YouTube channel. I really appreciate you. If you are here on the YouTube channel, please consider subscribing. My goal is to hit 1,000. I would really appreciate it. The first time I tried doing YouTube, I was doing it in my way, and now that I'm doing it in the pathway of God, I'm seeing a huge change, and we're getting really close to 1,000. I'm really happy. Thank you. God bless you. If you're interested in having questions about the Bible, or questions about Christianity, or questions about having a relationship with Jesus, please let me know on the comment section also. Anyway, see y'all later. I'm gonna go to sleep. It's like 3 in the morning right now. Have a good one. Bye.